Hi everyone, Matt here from Proof Fly Fishing. In today's video we're going to do two things. I'm going to show you a way to remove sets from a rod section, and after that we're going to apply finish to the rod blank to protect it. So first of all, what is a set? A set is when a rod section is in a relaxed position, but it has a pronounced bend to it. There are different kinds of sets, and we're not going to get into a whole lot of detail as far as distinguishing those from one another. But basically the technique for removing a set or minimizing a set, you can't always get rid of them completely, but if you can make the rod a little bit straighter, sometimes that's going to be enough to get it fishing well. So the first thing we want to do when working with a set is identify where it is on the rod section. So we can sight this down just like we do if we were putting guides on a round blank. We're going to locate where that set is, and so what we're going to do first is we're going to locate where the set is in proximity to the ferrule, or the section that's closest to us. So if it was about here, we would mark the top, and I'll explain what top means in a second. I'm going to put a piece of, this is just our green guide tape, along the flat. Now, we'll exaggerate this to show you. If this were the set, we want that tape on the inside of that bowl, on the upper part of that, inside part of that set. And then what we're going to identify is where the set stops. So if the set kind of is close to the middle of this blank, then what we're going to do is kind of define the sides of where that curve is taking place. It's uncommon for the rod section to be bent in its entirety. Usually a set is going to be bent on a particular part of that rod section. So what we've done here is we have identified the location of the set, and here are the two outside parts of that set. So now we know where to focus on. And by putting the tape on here, when we start addressing that set, we'll have a visual cue of where it is and which direction we need to bend against in order to remove it. So when we get that defined, your best option for removing a set is going to be a heat gun. When bamboo rods are made, you use a fair amount of heat to flatten the nodes on them. So the cane can take plenty of heat. The part that we need to be careful of, and this is where removing a set becomes both science and an art, is that you need to heat the cane to the point where the cane will actually relax and allow you to flex it in the opposing direction to remove that set without compromising the glue that's holding the various pieces together. So that's kind of the art side of it. The science is obviously the physics that's going on in the cane, and as you heat it, what's happening there. So with the heat gun, how you want to do this is you want to keep that cane moving. So you want to heat the entire set, moving it back and forth and rotating that the blank so that we don't burn any of the sections. We don't want to overheat one section while the other section's cool. We try to correct it and nothing happens. We want to heat as close as possible the entire section evenly. And you'll move that back and forth. Now when you touch it, I don't use gloves because I want to have as much feedback as I can from this blank as far as what's going on with it. So I don't wear any gloves. It's going to get hot. It's going to get hot to the point where you don't want to touch it, at least for a long period, but you can at least assess the heat very quickly by pinching it. There's kind of a sweet spot to getting the cane hot enough. If you have extra rod sections that you're not using, maybe a rod with broken ferrules or a rod that's snapped in a certain part, it's a great idea to take that, heat it up, and you'll get a feel for it. You'll feel that cane relax on you a little bit with enough heat. It's difficult to describe apart from actually feeling it, but If you practice a bit, if you have those extra rod sections, give it a shot. And what you want to do once that occurs, once that cane is starting to relax, is we've marked the top of the set, we've marked the inside of this bowl, and we want to bend against it. We don't want to go crazy, like bending as hard as we can. We don't need to go that far. And sometimes working a set out can take 2-3 times of heating it in order to get it where we want it to, making small steps each way. So when it's warm, we're going to bend against it, and we're going to take it off the heat, holding a little pressure, and we're going to let it go. And as that cane cools, it's going to be corrected a bit in the direction that you've been bending it. And that's where it can take a few times to work out a really bad set or a set that's been in there for a long time. We're just going to work it in steps. There are some parts of rod sections that you'll never get perfectly straight. And honestly, they don't have to be perfectly straight. It's nice if you can get them as straight as possible. Sometimes you'll have slight twists in a rod. Those can be difficult to get out. Usually those are removed when the bamboo rod is being made. We'll roll it, we'll use a brayer on top of it just to get it perfectly flat during that process when the glue is still a little bit mobile. But once it's set up, and if it's been heat treated in particular, it can be very difficult to get a twist out. But the good news is you can generally live with most twists, but getting those getting the rod as straight as possible is going to be the goal here. So take your time, work with it, don't be in a rush, and you'll get a feel for it. You'll be able to bend that rod and you'll feel that cane just soften under your hands with the proper amount of heat. If you don't have a heat gun, I have some people I know that will use an electric range. It can take a little bit longer and the heat is not as directed as a heat gun, but that's a good way to do it too. If you don't want to invest in the heat gun, just move it back over the range until it warms up and you should be all set. The reason also we do, it's not incidental that we are doing the removal of the set now. All the finish is off the blank. We did that in our last video. And you can try to remove a set with the finish on, but the amount of heat required sometimes will bubble that finish. Sometimes there's a guide right where that is, and you don't want to cook the thread or the guide. So it's nice when the blank is just in its raw, stripped down form to address a set at that point. Alright, give me just a minute and we'll be back and we're going to talk about sealing this blank. There's a lot of different options there, but I'm going to show you one that works well and doesn't require any specialized equipment. Alright, thanks. Okay, we're back. I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to talk about different options as far as sealing or protecting your bamboo rod blank. Now the traditional finish on bamboo is going to be spar varnish, which is a marine varnish, has a high oil content which allows it to flex without cracking. Spar is great, and there are a lot of different ways you can apply spar to a blank. The traditional way is to have a tube of spar and then you dip the blank in it and extract it very slowly, leaving a nice thin coat on it. It can take some specialized equipment. Spar can get expensive if you're getting a good spar, and there are other options out there. But if you don't want to take the spar approach, there are two other options. One I'm going to show you today, and another one we have an article on our website in the tutorial section that's linked to. One is you can actually use Gorilla Glue to create a nice hard finish on the blank. There's a PDF on our website. I'll leave that to you to look at that one. The option we're going to do today is to use True Oil. This is actually a gun stock finish, and what it does is it leaves a very thin coat. We're going to apply it with a piece of paper towel, and it leaves a razor thin coating, and we're going to actually build up that coat over the course of, it'll probably take 2 days. It's not a lot of time each day, but the process just has some drying time required in it. So True Oil is going to be the most cost-effective way. It's a great finish. I've used it for years on rods that I've restored, and it's worked really well. So I'm going to take you through a couple different techniques. We're going to apply the True Oil first, and if you want to stop there, you can. It's a perfectly reasonable finish, just applying as is. I'm going to show you a couple additional steps as far as sanding, and then we're going to polish the True Oil after that. If you want to take that just to bring your rod to a little nicer finish, a more polished satin look as opposed to a high gloss look, we'll take you through that in just a few minutes. But the process is simple. I'm going to show it to you right now. True Oil has solvents in it, so it's a good idea to put on some type of gloves when working with it. I try to stay away from solvents whenever possible, and so we're going to take a few precautions here. So I've just got a plastic glove, True Oil. We have a piece of paper towel. If you want, you can use an old t-shirt, whatever you have around. As long as it's clean and soft, should work fine. So we're going to pour a little bit of this oil into this cloth. It doesn't take a huge amount. If you see it right there, there's maybe an inch puddle, and you don't even have to have a puddle on there. As long as it's damp on the paper towel, you should be fine. We're going to start at the base. This is the tip section, and we're going to wrap that towel around the base, and you'll see it go on. It'll add a nice sheen to it, and we're just going to work our way up that blank just like that. We're going to come back down, and we're going to do it one more time. And that coat is done. I'm going to set this, I'm going to lean it up against the wall. Only the very tip of that is touching the wall, and the tip top will cover that, so it's not a problem. I'm going to apply a little bit more. And then we have our butt section here. I'm going to start at the base. I'm going to leave the area that the grip's going to go on. I'm not going to seal it because I want that to be a little rougher, so it'll take the epoxy for the grip. I'm just going to work my way up, rotating that. If you want to tape off that ferrule station, you can do that, but come right up next to it. Work your way down. I usually go 2 passes depending on the rod section. There's no rush. Thin coats, we don't want any runs. The coat's so thin that it shouldn't run at all, and it's very quick. We're done with that coat. I'm going to set this one up against the wall. Take your gloves off, close up your True Oil. You want to dispose of this stuff. It has solvents in it outside. Don't let it pile up. Start a fire in your house or something. Let those sit for probably 2 hours depending on temperature and humidity. You can always do a little test on a dowel or something, and when that's dry, you can reapply. So usually in a given day, I'll do like maybe 4 coats, 2 to 3 hours apart. Let it sit overnight, and then in the morning, the next day, I'll do an additional 2 to 3 coats, bringing the overall number of coats to 6 or 7. Don't have to worry, it's going to be a very thin coat, and in the next step we're going to actually sand that out. So I'll show you how to sand that finish in just a minute. Alright, thanks. Alright, in our last video we applied 4 to 6 coats of True Oil directly to the blank, and we've given it a good 24 hours to fully dry on the blank, and what you're left with is a nice finish. You can probably see this, it's got a high gloss to it. It's a little high, a little too glossy for me, so what I'm going to show you are a couple additional steps that you can take to kind of polish out this finish a little bit and then and smooth everything out. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to take a small piece of 400 grit sandpaper, and we're going to lightly sand the entire finish of this blank. It's important that we're not trying to cut through all the layers of finish that we've put on. What we're doing is kind of leveling out the upper layers. Now, how I like to do it, again, this is a tip section, so we're going to be moving from the thicker section toward the thin section. We never want to start with the thin section because that's how you break tips. So we're starting with the bottom, and I basically take a finger and apply light pressure, and I'll just move it up and down that blank, and you can see that high gloss coming off very easily. And I'm just going to work up that blank, rotate to the next flat, and do the same thing. It's a good idea too when you're doing this to have a piece of dry paper towel on hand so you can remove the dust. And what you're going to do in the first part of sanding this is just kind of use your eyes to check for glossy spots. And if you see one, then you can just polish that out, or sand it out, excuse me. And that way we're not going to miss any sections. I know with 6 flats it can be easy to miss something. You're going to come right up to that ferrule. And again, we're not applying much pressure at all here. We don't want to cut through all the layers. We just want to smooth it out. So take your time, work up and down that blank. You'll get some dust starting to build up, and that's where we're just going to wipe it off. And then what you can do is look for shiny spots. You can see where that sandpaper has hit and where it hasn't, and you can go through and do kind of a light spot sanding to get all those areas that might have been missed with the initial pass. Be real careful if you're going to sand on the corners, the apex of this blank, because the finish tends to be a little bit thinner on the corners. So just take your time when doing that. So once you get the whole thing and you can't see any like obvious glossy spots on the blank, then we're going to switch to our hands, and we're going to just run our fingers up that blank and see, like right here, without even looking, I can feel that there's an area that needs to be sanded just a little bit. So I'm going to sand that, I'll wipe it off, and we're going to check that spot again. Okay, it's gone now. And we're going to just work our way up the entire section, first visually and then with our hands, to make sure that that finish is nice and even. When you want something where there's no bumps, you know, occasionally depending on the shape of your blank, there might be, you know, a ding in it, or, you know, a node that wasn't flattened as well as it perhaps could have been when the rod was being built. So use your judgment as far as what's acceptable and what's not. But as far as the finish is concerned, you want to take off any inconsistencies. Once you get the whole thing sanded and you're happy with it, then I take a damp piece of paper towel and just run it up the length of the blank to remove any of that dust. So we're ready for the next step. And the next step is pretty straightforward. You're just going to apply 2 thin coats of True Oil. And in these coats, we're not going to wipe up twice. We're going to apply it to a towel, a little piece of cloth, and we're going to wipe up the blank, let it dry for 2 hours, bring it back, wipe up the blank one more time, and we're done. Now the next step I'm going to show you is kind of the one of the small trade secrets of building rods to get one of those satin, perfectly smooth finishes. So this is the butt section, and I sanded it yesterday, and I applied 2 coats of True Oil to it, and it's noticeably smoother from the sanding. And again, if you want to stop here, that's perfectly fine. It feels almost like glass. I can feel no no bumps in it. It doesn't have quite as high of a gloss from having those previous coats knocked down a little bit. But the next step is really going to take it over the top. So we're going to start with, this is a piece of t-shirt that's been wet. It's just lightly damp. And then we're going to use something called rotten stone. Rotten stone is a polishing compound. It's actually decayed limestone. And this stuff is amazing if you've never used it. You don't need very much, so we're just putting a little amount on this cloth, and what we're making is a paste, just like that. And if there's some excess there, you can knock it off. We just want it to kind of stain the t-shirt, if you will. What we're going to do with this is we're going to start on the bottom of the blank, and we are going to polish that finish. And in so doing, it's a very, very fine abrasive. And now we're taking that finish and we are not only smoothing it, we're removing the gloss finish, and it's going to leave it with a really nice satin finish. The difference, even though we're using such a fine polishing compound, is amazing when you get done. And it doesn't take that long. One thing you want to do is make sure you're using, rotten stone can be kind of difficult to find. We carry it on the site. You want to make sure you get a good one, because occasionally you'll get one and it'll have like larger pieces in it that can actually scratch or score the blank. And yeah, you certainly don't want that, because then you start over with the finishing process. So again, you just work it up and down, and you'll feel that blank become just silky smooth in the process. And it doesn't take long at all. Just about done here. I tend to be a little fussy when it comes to this stage. And that's it. It's probably a little difficult to see. And then the last stage, last thing we're going to do is just take another damp cloth, and we're going to wipe that blank down to remove any of the residue from that rotten stone. And then your blank is sealed. Now we can move on to installing the grip and installing guides. I'm going to show you how to use color preserver on silk in our next video. We're going to wrap the stripping guide, and we'll go from there. But okay, thanks for watching.